Welcome back to Don't F With Your People. I'm your host, and I've been away for a minute. I'd like to have a lot of really legitimate excuses. The reality is I just got busy with life. I've been catching a lot of gruff from my dedicated fans and family members who saying, "What's up? We're waiting for more content. We really have missed some of the goodness that you've provided for us and waiting for more content." So the reality is I've been out there applying a lot of the stuff I wanted to talk to you about over the next few episodes and so forth. And the reality is it's just confirming that a lot of these things that I've learned over my 30 plus years of professional experience and leading people, leading teams, managing people, whatever you want to call it, it continues to just prove out to be true. So one of the things that just stuck out to me, I'm currently consulting for a company. It's a nationwide company, publicly traded. It's in an industry that I had not spent any time in previously. So I'm helping with a merger. So it was an acquisition by a company publicly traded of an organization I had worked with in an industry I haven't worked in. So helping them bring the cultures of the two organizations together, streamlining processes and technologies and so forth. So it was interesting, real quick, to find out that, a lot of the things I found to be true in the banking technology space where I had worked weren't necessarily true in these industries, and some of the things I took for granted in terms of being priorities weren't necessarily true in these industries. And so I had to kind of step back and say not all things are created equal. Got to kind of assess where people are at, meet them where they're at. That's one of my themes is, you got to not always make assumptions in terms of the playing field and the level of the people you're working with. And I don't mean that as a slight, because they're experts in their field. Just because they're not experts in the things that I, find to be important, doesn't mean that they're not experts in the areas that I'm working on and focused on with them. So, excuse me for a second. So, as I get into it, one of the things that immediately stood out is, despite expertise and despite the processes that we're building together and assessing what is currently in state. So, the process is always like, let's define what the current state is. How do the current processes work? What's your current technology? What are your current contracts? Let's document what you have in place today. I mean, that was a challenge in a lot of cases. A lot of people just simply didn't know what was already there. Now let's assess what we want to be the future state. What does good look like when we get the two organizations together? What vendors do we want to work with? And then what are the procedures to get from where we're at today to where we want to be in the future? So what's my point? What's the big aha moment is that there's a saying I heard at a conference. There was a speaker in that conference, a consultant that did a lot of leadership stuff, and their saying was, culture eats process for lunch every day. And it just absolutely couldn't be truer, because we could come up with the greatest processes in the world and new technology and all that, but if the people didn't want to change, and if the people were not accustomed to changing or did not follow the leaders of the organization because they weren't accustomed to having to follow them, it was not going to happen. And so a lot of the things that we had plans for or that we were counting on doing just had to be put on the back burner until we got some of the cultural things addressed, like just changing the way they thought. So this relatively smaller company, privately held, private equity held them, owned them, but still privately held. They didn't have a huge sphere of influence in terms of the decisions they were making. It was pretty controlled in a tight sphere. They could make their own decisions and turn those decisions around rather quickly. They were acquired by a publicly traded company, has a lot more bureaucracy, a lot bigger company, Those two cultures were not anywhere similar. And the company I was, had worked with previously was not used to having to wait for decisions. We're not having to, make decisions based upon guidelines and things like that. So it was, kind of awakening that even though I had support all the way to the top in both organizations, it didn't mean anything was going to get done very fast. If we didn't have the teams, brought along for the ride, they had to kind of have some buy-in, and, just browbeating it into them was not going to be a successful play. So things have taken longer than anybody expected. That doesn't mean we haven't been successful. We've had huge success so far. I don't really want to name names because I don't want any of this to come off as negative. I think they're very proud of the success they've had. I'm proud of the success that we've accomplished. And, I've learned a ton about this industry, and really excited that I'm able to provide them with perspective that none of them in the organizations had previously, because, at my time at Fiserv, we did a lot of acquisitions, participated in due diligence a lot of times to ensure that the products we were acquiring would fit the bill, that the companies we were working with, had good people. We always looked at it as like to make it make sense, it had to be at least one of three things. It had to be for the product, for the people, or for the client base that you would be doing this deal. And if it didn't have at least one of those three things, then it's probably not a good fit. This merger and acquisition made sense on at least two of those three. And so this is going to be good for the organization long term. Squeezing all the goodness out of it that's possible, it makes a lot of sense. But just, I guess the heads up there is, like, as you're working with people and engaging with people you don't know well, before you just dive in and start, tearing into a plan and how you're going to do it, think about, where they're coming from. Are they accustomed to making change? Do they want to make change? And then figure out how to motivate them first and foremost. Think about that cultural aspect, their attitude and things like that first and foremost, before just implementing a plan, because they in fact may not even be listening to your plan if they're not thinking about it, like saying, who the hell is this guy to tell me what to do? I don't have to listen to them, and you're wasting your breath. Figuring out how to motivate them, get on board with this new way of doing things, that's got to be covered off first, making sure you got them on board, or else you're just going to waste a lot of time and effort. And you can't make any assumptions on that. As we've talked about before, you can assume nothing. You can assume that the HR team from the existing companies have not communicated properly about the change that's forthcoming. You can assume that nobody on either team has got the full picture in mind. Just because you sat with the leaders of both organizations, you see the big picture, doesn't mean that any of them have seen it or understand what they're trying to accomplish with this plan. So with that, glad to be back, glad to be sharing the things I'm learning, ongoing learning, lifelong learner, and hope that you got a little something from this one. And I'm looking at this as maybe a Labor Day twofer today. So thanks a lot for listening, and if you haven't already, like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll keep cranking out content for you. Appreciate you.